Welcome to this week's edition of the Reporter Roundtable here on the Red River Farm Network. I'm Don Wick, joined by Randy Coonan and Kira Hart. Megan Overby with a day off today, but she's been out and about this week as well, covering a lot of meetings and activities. Randy, let's start with what's happening in the markets. We've had a wild ride in this trade yesterday, even a historic type of drop in the commodity markets. A lot of commodities impacted, but corn and soybeans in particular took a big hit.
Yeah, even more so the soybean oil kind of kicked things off here yesterday. Actually, last couple of days, we had limit down moves in soybean oil on Wednesday. And the CME group allowed for the entire soybean complex to trade at expanded limits yesterday. And boy, did they use it. At one point, I think the limit yesterday was for soybeans itself was $1.50. And we traded down $1.40 at one point before coming back. Ended up $1.18 3/4 lower in the July contract. Had to kind of almost relearn how to read a market screen. I have never seen that kind of a move. And looking at some of the market analyst responses this morning, if not the biggest move in one session, one of the top four, only about the fourth time in 100 years or more, where we traded more than $1 lower in any contract at one point. So it was, guys are using the word bloodbath, and it really was. Fund liquidation drove it all, and computer trading was another culprit there as well, because there's just no emotion in this market anymore. You hit those sell stops and down we go.
We had a couple of factors as well with the Fed. They had their meeting earlier this week, so the dollar was very strong, a little rain in the forecast. China kind of having some impact on what they're doing as far as speculation in the marketplace, and all that seemed to accelerate when we got into the trade. Really, the fundamentals haven't changed in this market, though.
No, fundamentals have not. However, with the Biden administration kind of hemming and hawing about maybe changing up some of their biofuels mandates a little bit, that's what got soybean oil nervous on Wednesday. And it just kind of spilled over yesterday. Nothing, as you said, the fundamentals have not changed. We are still looking at very, very tight carryouts. And a crop, we're going to need trend line yields on this crop to even come close to meeting USDA expectations. And right now, with this drought going on in the northern plains, that is getting further and further from reality than what most traders would like to suggest.
That drought, obviously, the big story that we've been dealing with here in the northern plains. Governor Burgum and Ag Commissioner Goring having a trio of town hall meetings. Carol, also earlier in the week, you were in Fargo. There was a roundtable meeting with a handful of ag leaders about the drought and the carbon initiatives as well. So certainly a big subject that we've been dealing with this week. Yesterday, I was at the meeting in Rugby, and they had a full house. In fact, the meeting room was much too small for the amount of interest that was there. They had to put speakers out in the parking lot so folks could hear outside that were unable to make it into the meeting itself. So that was a very interesting session. I had a chance to be there. And one thing that was talked about, Governor Burgum mentioned that he spoke with Ag Secretary Vilsack on Wednesday. We already have, at least on a limited basis, grazing available on CRP ground in virtually every county in North Dakota. There's a couple exceptions, but they're looking for early haying opportunity on that CRP ground. It's funny, one rancher said nobody really likes to hay that CRP ground. The only people that benefit from that are the chiropractor and the parts man. I thought that was a good line, but obviously a lot of frustration with what's going on with drought, and risk management agency seemed to be in the crosshairs a lot yesterday. Just growers, ranchers looking for a little bit more flexibility in what's happening in that arena as well. It seemed like your meeting on Monday, Kara, when they talked about it in a roundtable session, I don't think these town hall meetings were even on the plate at that point, were they?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, Don. Someone at the meeting had mentioned that maybe there were other meetings being considered for later on in the week, but whenever I visited with the governor about it in the one-on-one interview, the governor just kind of said that they know, they acknowledge that there have been issues in other parts of the state, and that they had planned to be in that north central part of North Dakota soon. And so you kind of, read between the lines there. The next day they came out with an announcement. I think it was the next day. So it's interesting how a town hall can morph from a round table, and maybe that was the plan all along. But I watched on the Facebook Live yesterday of your meeting at Rugby, and I just couldn't believe the turnout at that event. I didn't catch the Medora event later on in the day, and I didn't catch the event the day before that. I think Megan did, but the people showed up for these meetings, and they weren't afraid to tell you what was going on. I think that's important.
Governor Brigham, right at the start, said they were here to listen, and very receptive. I think trying to find some ways to help growers or help ranchers during this real challenging time. He mentioned if you go back to last fall through this spring, it is the driest we've ever had in the 127 years of record keeping as far as the state of North Dakota. Also related to the disasters, crop disasters, we had a long-awaited announcement as it relates to the quality loss adjustment and WIP Plus program. Kara, what news did we have there?
Oh my gosh, Don, North Dakota farmers have been waiting months to hear what's going to happen with the remaining 2019 WIP Plus program payments. And last Friday, the USDA announced that they would be seeing additional WIP Plus and also the quality loss adjustment program payments starting this week. Many farmers in this area had already received half of the 2019 WIP Plus program payments, and the USDA said another 40% would be paid out. So farmers aren't going to be getting for WIP Plus the entire remaining half of that yet. But I think they're trying to do what they can fund. Many of you, if you follow this closely, they got extra money at the end of the year last year for these programs. Essentially, USDA had to use one pool of money for both quality loss adjustment and the remaining half of WIP Plus, and QLA was prioritized. So farmers will be getting the full quality loss adjustment program payment if they qualified for that. And again, if you look at the WIP Plus program overall, farmers will receive 90% overall what they were scheduled to receive. And it's interesting, earlier on in the week, North Dakota Senator John Hoeven asked Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack about QLA and WIP Plus and how soon that payments would be coming out. And Vilsack responded that, in fact, more money could be made available for the WIP Plus program, just pending a few states. And I think that there is some kind of a grant program in 4 states. I visited with FSA Administrator Zach Ducheneau and asked him about it yesterday. And he said, it could be fall before they know if there's going to be more money for WIP Plus. I guess that's the bottom line. I've been asking farmers, and thank you for everyone who's responded to it on Twitter and also on Facebook, just in private messages, have you started to receive it? I see on Twitter the majority of you have not, and FSA Administrator Ducheneau says to be patient. It takes them a while, or the FSA a little bit, once the payments have been authorized to make it to your bank account. But I did hear from at least 1 or 2 that they had received at least the WIP Plus portion of the payments. So if you haven't already received that, just stay tuned. This is such a big story because it took so long for these disaster programs. This is coming, for 2018, well, rather 2019. And I think some things that happened in 2018, essentially, 2 years ago, something that happened 2 years ago. It took this long for FSA to get these payments. And I think that's part of it. And it's coming at a time where some of these farmers going through really dry conditions probably would benefit from this. So it was a really big story. FSA received more than 223,000 applications for WIP Plus across the country, and about 40,000 applications for the quality loss adjustment program. So that's my update. It's a long one, but it seems anticlimactic for how long we've covered this story, but it was a big one in the last week.
Related to that, the dry conditions, we're always looking at the crop and talking to farmers across the region. Randy, on Tuesdays, you go out for crop watch. I joined you on this past week. We kind of visited one of the garden spots of North Dakota, that southeast corner. The crop looked pretty good for the most part.
Yeah, it did, and we're talking in that south of Fargo into Richland County, and they did receive some rains. They started with moisture too, which kind of helped them out. So they've seen some rain. They've also seen some frost in that same area and some hail. But that crop there, the corn there, was already knee high to me, and some of the rows were starting to fill to shut already as far as the corn goes. However, corn was rolling up during the heat of the day, and even early in the morning, 11 o'clock or so in the morning, we're seeing the leaves starting to roll. So it is dry. They do need more moisture, but you go just 20 miles either direction, and that crop is not near that big. It's a lot in a lot more stress. So that's one thing too. They talked about some of that small grains, and there isn't a lot of it grown down in that area, but the one stuff that is there looked pretty tough. Again, didn't stool out, pretty thin, short. One of the farmers who we talked to, he said he had some that was ankle high or knee high and heading out, some that was that high, not heading out, some that was waist high, looked really good, some that was waist high and looked pretty tough. So kind of all over the board is what we saw as far as what those crops were looking like down in that area.
And like I said, that's an area that has seen some rains. Obviously, we have a lot of folks that are dealing with really tough stands and poor conditions because of the very dry conditions. Even that drought monitor extended some of the dryness in the state of Minnesota, South Dakota, having some more problems, and North Dakota, virtually 100% of the state is in a severe drought situation anyway. So you can see what's happening as far as the crop situation. One other story we've been working on for quite a while, it seems like what's been happening in Spiritwood. We look at, years ago when the malt plant shut down, and we talked about maybe a fertilizer plant with CHS. Then there was talk of soybean processors coming out of Minnesota and putting in a crush plant in Spiritwood, and none of those things really materialized. But ADM had a meeting with farmers and local officials on Tuesday. Kara, you were at that meeting. There had to be some excitement to see the progress we're making here.
That's right, Don. Actually, the event happened on Wednesday. And farmers, I think, as well as myself, because we've been reporting on this for some time, it's actually hitting that North Dakota is going to be getting a soybean crush plant. I mean, we had the announcement from ADM, I think that was back in May, that they were coming, but the visit from ADM to Jamestown and the fact that they met with growers after this lunch that I was at, I think really solidified their commitment, and it makes, I think, local farmers feel a lot better. The soybean crush plant is going to be the first one in North Dakota entirely for soybeans. And we got a little bit of, we didn't get much from ADM. ADM is really tricky sometimes to get a comment from, but they did make comments during the luncheon, and ADM's president of North American Oils and Biodiesel, Ken Campbell, was talking about, kind of a high level overview of the next steps. He said they closed on the property on June 11th. They have subcontractors in place, and they'll be deployed June 21st, that they plan to start demo work at the end of June. And they were optimistic the real construction could begin the last half of September. I think they're also going through the permitting process too, so that'll kind of weigh in on what happens. ADM, as Don mentioned, will be turning a former Cargill malt plant at that Spiritwood Energy Park into that $350 million soybean crush facility. When I visited with some of the folks with the Jamestown Stutzman Development Corporation, the people who are working with ADM to maybe make some of those revisions and help, they mentioned that maybe ADM would only keep the barley silos and maybe retrofit them. And then everything else, maybe ADM would come in and totally redo. But ADM did not confirm that, but that was just according to some of the folks with the Jamestown Stutzman Development Corporation. And when this is completed, it will crush 25% of North Dakota soybeans. That vegetable oil from the plant will go to a refinery in Dickinson. And then I visited with North Dakota Agriculture Commissioner Doug Goring, and he was talking about the use of the soybean meal and how it can be used in local and surrounding markets. And the topics of maybe building up North Dakota's livestock industry was part of that. Wasn't a big piece, but I mean, that's something to think about too. And I think folks are really excited that this is coming to North Dakota. and the reality certainly sank in this week.
Certainly should have an impact on the basis and be beneficial to our growers in that way. Randy, don't you think?
Kara, is scheduled to be like 2023 when they're looking for that first crop?
Yeah, thanks, Randy. They are scheduled. Well, they're hoping, I should say, to have this up and running by the fall harvest of 2023.
Okay.
So that's the timeline, and thanks for following up with that. That's the timeline we're looking at. So again, I mentioned earlier they had the grower meetings. That was closed to media. I wasn't involved with that, so I'm not exactly sure what they covered. But when I visited with Nancy Johnson with the North Dakota Soybean Growers Association earlier on in the day, she was talking about there are just some logistics, farmers want to know about delivery, basis, some of the things that you want to think about if you're going to do business with someone like ADM.
Sure. When we saw that happen with the AGP plant down in Aberdeen this year, all of a sudden the basis just exploded down there because they needed the beans. So hopefully we'll see a portion of that come up this way as well.
Well, and then this plant is not far from that, the AGP plant in Aberdeen, once it'll be built. It's within, I'm not exactly sure the mileage. Is it 100 miles radius?
Yeah, 150 or something like that. Yeah, it's within 150 miles.
And then to kind of build on that, we continue to watch what's happening over in Crookston with the Epitome Energy soybean crush facility there too. And it sounds like they broke escrow earlier this month. And I think that announcement came out within the last week or so too. I'm not sure if we had a chance to really talk about it. But there are lots of soybean crush facilities being built. I think that was forecasted by some of the ag economists, but it's interesting to see it all come to fruition here, or at least be built.
Yeah, that's one of the things. So you talk to market analysts and grain traders and stuff, and they're talking about the growing importance of the Northern Plains, the Dakotas, Minnesota, northwestern Minnesota in particular, about soybean production. And this is the growing area where we're seeing increase in acres and growing, and how important this crop is beginning to be for the U.S. soybean production.
Nancy Johnson mentioned when I visited with her this week that I've got to find this stat. It's something along the lines of 80% of the soybeans grown in North Dakota are within the first 100 miles of the state. We talked about the expansion of acres. Once this planted Spiritwood gets built, how would that expand? How could it expand? And maybe further west. We'll have to see what happens. It's not the first time I've heard that. I think I visited with Frayne Olson right when this announcement was made, and he mentioned something along the lines of that too. But it will be interesting to see how this grows in North Dakota.
We should note Megan was at the North Dakota Stockmen's Association feedlot tour this week as well. That was in southeastern North Dakota. A lot of focus on hoop barn, so it's kind of interesting to see the 3 stops they had on that tour here this past week as well. So those are some of the things we've been working on. We'll keep you up to date, of course, online, on air, and in our e-newsletter as well. So stay with us. On behalf of Kara Hart, Randy Kuhn, and I'm Don Wick. We're the Red River Farm Network. We're reporting agriculture's business.